Not hearing you.
Oh, can you hear me now, Joy? Yes. Can you hear me, Joy?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Once again, August 30th, week 9 of the year. It's going to be week 10, and I should mention just so that I remember to tell you, I actually won't be here. I'll be at the and Sally Gaskell will be here in my place leading the meeting. So thank you very much, Sally, in advance of that. Today, I would like to just, to start off the meeting, I'd like to just mention a few things about polio. As you know, polio has been in the news, and with this sort of alarming sense of what's happening in major places around the world, including New York City. As all of you are, probably, I've been reading what's been happening. I think somebody's microphone is open. So if you're online, make sure that your microphone's off. Thank you. Yeah.
Got it.
So I've been reading up on the news, and I thought that I would just sort of mention the distinction between the wild and domestic types of polio, so that we know exactly what's going on. So with the wild type, which is the type that we've been eradicating around the world very successfully, is still very much under control. And there are 3 strains of the wild type, 2 of which have been completely eradicated, and 1 of which remains at large in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So very, very small pockets there of the wild polio strains. And then the sad news is that we're also hearing about major metropolitan areas such as New York City, in which the domesticated version has sprung up. And I didn't know what the domesticated version is. And so what it actually is, ironically, is that the vaccinations that have been used every now and then will pop up as an experience of polio, as the disease itself. And so that's basically what's happening, is that we've been so successful in eradicating polio that the domesticated version is the one that's popping up all over the world. As the medical experts work out what to do, luckily there's a newer version of the vaccine that doesn't seem prone to these rare infections. So it seems like we're headed definitely in the right direction. And even though it's a worrying concern, it's not something that's going to completely upset the program that's been developed by Rotary, the World Health Organization, the Gates Foundation, and other partners. So I just wanted to mention that to you. October 24th, which is 8 weeks away, is the World Polio Day. And I look forward to working with this club and others to mount an awareness campaign in support of Rotary International's efforts. So I just wanted to mention those thoughts about polio. So with that, I invite Bill Perkins to come up to the podium to welcome our guests.
Yes, it's my pleasure to welcome our guests today. We just have 2 guests in the room with us. Megan Gearhart, Rotaract past president. And Tracy Jovanovich, the daughter of Winston Chandel and his guest. Tracy. Thank you for attending. Join us again.
Thanks so much, Bill. And it's really great to have both of you with us. How wonderful. I shouldn't mention that you should know more about Rotary because you already know about Rotary. So it's great that you're with us.
I have some guests too.
Oh, you have? I'm sorry, Joy, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. And we have 3 guests on Zoom this afternoon, 2 of whom are guests of Trent Deckard. And thank you, Trent, for waving to us on Zoom. Ann Kolb and Dylan Thomas. We also have Emily Roberts joining us. And Trent, I don't know if she's another guest of yours or not, but we welcome all of you. Thank you.
Apparently she is. So that's great. Thank you. And if any of our guests want to know more about our organization, Trent's the one that you need to talk to, apparently, which would be great. Okay, Bill Brown, would you like to come up to the podium for the reflection?
Thank you, President Elaine. Thank you all for being here. And I wanted to address something that we are staring at all the time in this room, and that's the banner that says, Imagine Rotary. I imagine that would make a good topic for a reflection. The Latin root of the word means to form an image of. We imagine most powerfully with vision, with sketching, with doodling, dreaming. Imagination comes naturally to us as children. If I watch my grandchildren playing with cardboard boxes, it can be a house, it can be a fort, it can be an aircraft, and there are no rules. There's no instructions needed for that play. This form of unstructured play is often frowned upon as we move through school with standardized tests, and daydreamers are suspected of having learning disabilities. We soon learn that imagining is not considered productive and we should get back to the task at hand. Climb the hill in front of you, stop doodling. Look around the room and find some object. How did that object come to be? What was the original inspiration for it? Who imagined it? Who imagined this building? Who imagined this room in this building? Who imagined this organization that we belong to? Our world is filled with innovations which were born of imagination. Somebody imagined what didn't yet exist or built upon the imagination of others, which is more often the case. This collective imagination leads to most innovation. Businesses and organizations like Rotary are built upon these foundations of collective imagination, and they continue to evolve through dynamic process of collective imagination and innovation to remain relevant and vital. A recombination is at the heart of this, and this happens in nature as well as in human endeavors. We are inspired by the ideas of others, and we build upon them. And it turns out that recombination is even more powerful with diversity of ideas, diversity of people, diversity of backgrounds. So a room like this is a terrific mixing bowl for imagination. Imagination is often mocked or underappreciated at first. Dick Fosbury was a Medford, Oregon high jumper struggling to make his high school team. He couldn't make that 5-foot starting height. He was tall, he could get the front of his body over, but his hips always hit the bar. So he started experimenting with turning his body, and eventually he came to something that was quite different. He decided to go over the bar backwards. And he was not successful going over the normal way, which is called the straddle version. His track coach, I can only imagine him saying, "Fosbury, quit horsing around and get back to the straddle I showed you." Competitors mocked him, at least until he started beating them. In spite of the mockery, he eventually evolved a technique to place second in the state high jump competition with a jump of 6'5.5". That's way up there. This got him into the University of Oregon on a full scholarship. But when he arrived at the University of Oregon, his coach said, "You know, Dick, I think you'll get much better results with the straddle." And, but he did allow Fosbury to use his backflop method in freshman meets only, until he cleared 6'10" and broke the school record. And then the coach began teaching the Fosbury method to the rest of his high jumpers. So as you may know, Dick Fosbury went on to perfect the Fosbury flop. He won the gold medal in the 1968 Olympics with a leap of 7 feet 4¼ inches, going over backwards. So virtually all high jump champions since that time have used the Fosbury flop. But Dick Fosbury first had to imagine it, to form a picture in his mind of how he might get over that bar, and then he had to train his body to follow that mental picture. We go through most of our lives, most of our days on automatic pilot. Think about how much concentration it took you to learn how to drive. And now you don't think about it. Your body is automatically moving the steering wheel and working the brakes and the accelerator. It's not something you pay attention to at all. And we do a lot of things like that. We're like cows in the pasture. We follow our cow path. And the cow path gets deeper and deeper and deeper as we continue to use it. The rut gets deeper, harder to escape the more we use it. This also happens to organizations and businesses and institutions. It's hard for many people to imagine a future that is different from today, yet that may be the most important survival skill for humanity among the many existential challenges we face in the 21st century, where business as usual is a recipe for disaster. As you leave today, I challenge you to take a different route home or back to work. And I think what you'll find is you are more alert, you're curious, you're not doing automatic pilot, you're out of your rut. And then next week, I want you to sit next to somebody you've never sat next to before, introduce yourself, listen to their imagination about Rotary, see what they stimulate in your imagination, and then to escape your rut, share your ideas with your table mates. Listen with a yes and attitude, no buts allowed. Imagine Rotary. And I'll leave you with this quote from Albert Einstein, who said, "Imagination is everything. It's the preview of life's coming attractions." Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. That was really fantastic and so inspiring to us all. And it really sort of goes in line so much with what I feel that you've all been doing over the past few weeks. I feel that we're now well into this year, and it's been very inspiring and exciting for me to see how the different committees are now at work, how the different projects are evolving. We met with the board last week. We got together in person for the first time in a while at the Dimension Mill and Innovation Space, co-working space, and it was wonderful to meet there, to be able to get a sense of how everybody thinks about this year, and to talk about the way that we're developing this year with our social occasions, with the projects, with the programs, and with our aspirations for the year. So, Bill, that was really very special. And I'm thinking if all of you have ideas sitting next to somebody you've not met before, you can come up here and do a reflection as well and get used to what it's like to telling your story to your friends in a very comfortable and yet interesting and slightly different way. So that's a reminder to those of you who are thinking of doing reflections if you'd like to sign up. Okay, we have, I want to just mention another meeting that I had yesterday actually was about the event that we're having on October 4th at Mike Baker's farm. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're having a sort of a pizza party, and you'll be hearing about it this week. We're going to be sending out an invitation to all of you. We're really hoping that this will be your opportunity to bring some friends, bring your loved ones to meet up with us, have a good time. It's going to be in place of the meeting, the lunch meeting. We're actually meeting in the evening on that Tuesday, the 4th. So I just want to put that in your minds right now, and you'll be getting more information about that soon. Okay, we have some birthdays. Kevin Hopper-Knutstrom, August 28th. Past President Winston Schindel, August 29th. Mike Hoff, is that right? Yep. Mike Hoff is August 30th, and Shelley Yoder is August 30th. So 4 birthdays to celebrate this week. Anniversaries, Katie Beck is 4 years. Congratulations, Katie. Past President Leslie Green, 21 years. Fantastic. And then past President Charlie Osborne, 30 years. So congratulations to everybody. I think that there's time for a few minutes of happy dollars. So if anybody wants to share, I guess I'll just quickly say I'm going to put in $20. Maybe I should put in more than that. After having driven about 1,500 miles back and forth from Philadelphia this past weekend. So I'm here safe and sound. Gabrielle's in her college dorm room happily there, and luckily no mishaps along the way. So I'm happy to be there, very happy. Anybody else with a happy dollar to share? Charlotte. Oh, hold on, let's get the microphone to you. Oh, sorry, we'll get back to you, Martha, in a second. Test.
Okay, 35 happy dollars, no, 65, no, 35.
35 happy dollars.
For in memory of what would have been our 65th anniversary,
Oh,
wedding anniversary.
Congratulations, 65 years.
Yep.
Great.
So now we didn't make it quite all the way, but we made it pretty close.
Great, wonderful. Martha Wales, did you want to say something? Was there? Oh,
I have 15 happy dollars. We had our first Women's Financial Book Club meeting yesterday with 15 women. And so we'll be having another one in late fall. So if anyone is interested, any women are interested, we're really empowering women in Bloomington to take care of their finances. So thank you.
great, that's wonderful. Anybody online? Since we've not heard from somebody online for a while, feel free to just hold up your hand and say something. Here we go.
I'm just happy because I made it here and didn't miss another meeting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy too, but I hesitate to do it because I'm such an admirer of Charlotte. But Lee and I too will be celebrating our 61st wedding anniversary this week. And then we have 9 members of the family that they call mom, that call us mom and pop. So there's an extra $9.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
I've got 20 happy dollars for the 4 guests that are with me today. Many of you know in the last year, I've been busy with committing to a PhD in global leadership at St. Mary of the Woods College. It's their inaugural class. 4 of my colleagues, Lisa, Annie, Emily, and Dylan are with us today to hear from our guest speaker, and it's great to have my cohort friends with me.
Fantastic. Yeah, great. And then we've got Sarah over here. We'll do Sarah and then I think that we need.
I've got $5 to add to the $13,100 that the Indiana Members Credit Union gave us after the successful first golf outing for Teachers Warehouse. None of us know how to play golf, but we know how to serve breakfast. And so some of them did. And so 13,105.
Wow, congratulations. Incredible. What a fantastic year for Teachers Warehouse. Absolutely amazing. Okay, I just want to quickly acknowledge the wonderful people that we have to help this meeting be what it is. Marilyn Wood, thank you very much for greeting our guests in front of the room today. Tyler Nichols, who's basically he's going solo this week. Congratulations, yes. He's our producer. And then we have Joy Harder and Bill Perkins, thanks so much for introducing our guests. Bill, letting us know about imagination. Thank you so much. And then our roundabout reporter for the month, finally, the last time for the month is Sarah Laughlin. Thank you so much. We should be giving you another $30 or something for that. So thank you. Thank you very much. Good. Connie, would you like to come and introduce our guest?
Thank you, President Alon. Well, I just found out we're really lucky, more lucky than usual, that we have Khurram with us today because he's from Pakistan originally. And in Pakistan, the first floor would actually be 1 floor above this floor. So Khurram did find us today. Khurram Sheikh is a PhD student and IU Media School Associate Instructor. But that was not how I first met him last winter. To me, he was an Afghan refugee named Rafiq. We were in a play reading by Patricia Cranky of Telling Humans Playwright Studio, and Khurram and I had been cast opposite one another. I saw right away he had charm and talent, and damn, he's cute. Recently, Khurram was one of only 4 students to win awards at Common Ground, the annual graduate conference by IU's Media School Graduate Association. The winners were also awarded prizes for their media projects. Maybe the most complimentary aspect is that those voting were fellow presenters and other people attending the conference. When he was still a master's student, Khurram's project, Entanglements of Local, Global, and Regional Scales, Role of Film Talents Workshop for Cultural Diplomacy in Pakistan, won Best Presentation. It highlighted his research on the impact of transnational film platforms on Pakistani film. Fellow Rotarians and guests, I present to you Khurram Sheikh, knowledgeable in global media, film festival and exhibition, third world and post-colonial cinemas, and acting.
Thank you. That was a nice addition to some of the fields I'm working through. But yeah, it was good to kind of go back and figure out like how I was like a couple of years ago. Again, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to this talk, which I was discussing was really helpful because kind of we are in the academia. I'm doing a PhD, and so kind of get tied up into certain circles. And it's always good to kind of come out and be amongst the audience, amongst the people out here, and speak of your research. So yeah, that is kind of what I'd be doing in this talk. I have to figure this out. Hope this is working. Yeah. That's my name. And Reimagining Muslim Identity Through Arts is the name of my talk. I'll be getting into it just to kind of revisit where generally I come from as not only a person who's doing a PhD. I had a lot of time kind of working through certain arts organizations, theater, specifically filmmaking in Pakistan, and that kind of dictated my journey towards coming to a PhD program. So I just kind of talk about that. The show is short. So this was kind of a documentary that I was working on in Pakistan. Just to kind of give you a context of what Pakistan filmmaking is about, Pakistan does not have like a mainstream film industry working. So it's kind of, there's sort of independent projects that try to sort of film fundings from international platforms, NGOs, and so that's the kind of sort of network you have for such filmmaking practices. I was working with the Goethe Institute. It's a German embassy in Pakistan, and so what we were doing is a series of workshops with German filmmakers, mentoring Pakistani emerging filmmakers to kind of make some documentaries. This documentary was like highlighting some of the underrepresented voices in Pakistan, specifically in Muslim communities in Pakistan, the Sufi tradition that exists in South Asia, but now is coming to an extinction, which that's a whole political debate in itself. But yeah, just a short clip of this documentary is what I'd be showing.
ये जो ढोल धमाल है कर रहा है, ये इबादत खुशनू है। एक अंदर की जंग है अपने नफ्स के साथ। जब आपने किसी खाड़े में देखा होगा दो पहलवान लड़ते हैं ना, तो एक जीतता है तो वो फिर एक टांग के ऊपर धमाल डालता है। इसी तरह यह हर किसी की डालने वाली धमाल चीज़ नहीं है। ये वो बंदा धमाल डाले जो अपने नफ्स के साथ जंग लड़ के उसके साथ जीता हो, वो धमाल डाले। इसको इबादत खुशनू कहते हैं। ये है इसकी ऐन हकीकत, धमाल की।
Right. So this documentary was generally, in this documentary, I kind of build a historical background of what Sufi tradition is in South Asia. It's kind of very different from when you come to other countries, especially Middle East, and how Sufism impacted them. But what was interesting was that back in 2017, actually, was this sort of a terrorist activity that took place between two sectarian wars of Muslim sects that existed, and how that led to kind of, in a way, the extension of Sufi sort of shrine traditions that exist, the dhamal, the dancing. And so it's kind of still in the talks of whether that would be revived in certain ways. So yeah, that's kind of, the document is kind of up to date in that regard, because this shrine has never been able to kind of come back to terms with the sort of Thursday night events they kind of had. But anyway, coming back to sort of my experience working with the Goethe Institute for a year, I and my fellow filmmakers and the sort of film networks I was involved with was kind of, it kind of had a certain narrative to it. And I got interested in kind of thinking through the sort of films we make. The sort of workshop was a collaboration between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So the films we make and the sort of festivals you get acquainted to, mostly in the Berlin Film Festival in Germany. And I mean, so what was kind of at the core of all of this was kind of thinking through some of the notions of identity politics. At here was Muslim identity that we kind of were thinking through, which generally is a concept that, I mean, has a very global sort of a identity kind of construction when you think of how it is presented in certain places in the US or in Europe, or even in local areas between Middle East and Pakistan or South Asia. And so kind of thinking through how you can probably find, is there a way of finding a unanimous definition or a representation of this identity was kind of the question I came with at IU, and started off with my research work. And so this was kind of the sort of topic I was working through, representation of Muslim in Western media, to kind of study the sort of tropes, narratives that came forward, which interestingly were very generalized in many ways, I would say. Thinking through a certain costume, the homogeneous Muslim identity, which was kind of very, very sort of related to an Arab world. While, I mean, Muslims kind of cross borders to the far east of Indonesia, South Asia, even in US, the Black Muslims, but this was kind of restricted to a very specific, and you kind of get through that in certain academic papers and all. You just kind of have an identity that is represented in the media, with a very Arabic lens to kind of think through the Muslim identity. Muslim women as oppressed and subjugated mostly through hijab. The whole question of veil, and whether a veil is a form of resistance, is it a form of identities, how our Muslim culture is masculinist in a way, and how the sort of veil has been used as a form of oppression. And I mean, kind of generalizing Muslim women into a very specific form of understanding them into a very oppressed society. It's pretty interesting to look forward to. And yeah, that speaks to further questions of how stereotypes have come around, especially in a post 9/11 world, where undoubtedly they have been, can't avoid the fact that there have been local extremist groups, and which have acted in the form of taking religion into account. But at the same time, this kind of generalizes for a very, an identity that is very extremist in certain ways. The religious fundamental question is kind of at the core of it. But yeah, kind of thinking through these notions of what Muslim identity is, there's this scholar Edward Said and his notion of Orientalism, which is kind of really interesting to kind of think through the relationship between the West and the East, the relationship between the non-Europeans and the Europeans, and how that is constructed not only through a capital or through the means of economic means, but also it's more of an abstract notion. It's a more of a process of imagination, of image making, which is generalized, which then comes into thinking through how the Orient comes into being. And so in this case, when you think of Islamic Orientalism, you're thinking through notions of terrorism, intolerance, fundamentalism, the hijab that we mentioned as women not being liberated, conservative. And this sort of othering leads to what we've been experiencing in the West, a lot of Islamophobic tropes. Islamophobia kind of comes into being through a form of hatred, a form of imaginative fear towards a specific form of identity, which then becomes a part of interacting with people from a specific area. And so kind of exploring these concepts, what I came through was this very sort of recent trend. I was working across a social media sort of campaign. It's a project, Muslim Voices project, which is existing at IU with the Center for the Study of Global Change. And just trying to think through the forms of resistance one keeps. Is it locally embedded? Is it coming through certain forms of funding? This might be an interesting video to kind of think through how art as a tool of resistance comes into being and how that plays when we think of Muslim identity.
Can you give me more examples of how the art world is tackling Islamophobia?
Yes, I think that Islamophobia, like any prejudice, runs on fear. And I think one of the most powerful forces that the art world has is humanizing the quote unquote other. And if you look at comedians, for instance, they're social commentators, and they use comedy, they use satire to communicate core social issues, to highlight them, and to help us connect, with great ease. So that's one example.
Yes.
And also, if you look at works of art, paintings or sculpture or drawings, again, it has that humanizing quality. And that is the most powerful way to help us connect to each other.
Well, I want to give one example of an exhibition that took place in Brussels that was titled Islam, It's Also Our History.
Berman also kind of is kind of in charge. I mean, she's the founder of a firm that works on Islamophobia through art. And yeah, this humanizing quality, because we're kind of challenging an imaginative process. And that's why I term this sort of presentation reimagining, because it's a context that has been built, and we kind of have to recontextualize it in a certain way to build a new notion of a Muslim identity. And that is where the resistance is kind of at the core of it. How can that perception be changed? How can that be recontextualized in a new world, in a way, or in a very post-9/11 world we live in? And so I just like to point out a couple of sort of artistic movements or artists that I thought were really important to kind of highlight. Yeah, perfect. So Saud Abdul Khabir, well, she's from Brooklyn and she's in US. And it's really interesting kind of think through the work she does, which is, she has a book called Muslim Cool, kind of use it actually in a different way. And when we think of Muslim Cool, it's talking about a Black female Muslim identity. And so there's sort of intersections. We're not even talking about the Arab Muslim. We're talking about, let's talk about Black Muslims which exist in US, which are in, I mean, she did a research specifically in anthropological research in Chicago, and a lot of Black Muslims existing in that sphere. And so how do we understand the sort of representation that comes forward when we're thinking of a Black Muslim and the gender politics associated with it, and the sort of, I mean, the costume that you have to it. I mean, she has this, a very recent exhibition is kind of examining the intersections of official history and the untold stories of Black women. She does it through her mother's lens and kind of thinks through these emotions. But what she's trying to build on is, yes, kind of recontextualizing this, reimagining a Muslim perception. And in this case, let's talk about color, race, ethnicity, locality when we're talking about Muslims. So the second artist, thank you. The Burqa Band is a kind of a really interesting all-female indie rock band. I kind of included this example because I thought it'd be interesting to kind of think through how local Muslims exist. And this is kind of where my research work is taking me towards. I mean, yes, we have questions of representation and Orientalism that exists in Western media, but at the same time, I mean, does Islamophobia exist at a local level? Unfortunately, yes, it does. I mean, I belong to a country where there have been questions to religious extremism, and what do you make out of that? And the sort of resistance that comes within local communities, this is kind of really satirical and really interesting.
No burqa. At all your common places. No burqa. Posters of huge faces. No burqa. I don't know what they say. No burqa. They just stare far away. No burqa. No burqa. No burqa. When I was walking through the streets, pictures of people with no sin.
It's one of those sounds that kind of just stick to your head, and I could listen to it for a long time. I mean, I love the tune of it, right? And I could go along with this sort of lyrics too. But yeah, I mean, really interesting, right? This sort of video also. I mean, you have seeing through the hijab, kind of seeing through that lens the camera is put into public spaces, the notion of how you contrast public and private spaces when you're thinking of the whole whale, and undoubtedly this whole very recent, in fact not recent by now, but the Talibanization and how they're part of the government. I mean, the sort of resistance that needs to be taken on. I mean, unfortunately, we are seeing massive destruction of women's schools in Afghanistan, and yeah, this is kind of a way to kind of put forward the resistance that yeah, we could do it probably even wearing a burqa in certain ways. Yeah, this kind of brings me to my last kind of point or question that, I mean, I've not found an answer to, so I'd like to kind of think through with you all, is this notion of post-Orientalism. So the Orientalism thing was kind of posted towards kind of seeing Muslim identity through a certain lens, but Hamid Dabashi is kind of a scholar in Harvard who talks about when we have all of these immigrant communities, refugees, cross-border, transnational sort of communities we live in, how do we make sense of post-Orientalism for a Muslim identity? How do we get to know who gets to represent whom and by what authority? Are we going to be blaming or playing the self-blame in certain ways, or how do we figure that out? And so it's coming back to sort of reimagining, recontextualizing. This is kind of a process he talks about, the self-conscious colonial subject who attains agentional autonomy by way of knowing the language, speaks back to the sovereign by unlearning the language. So, I mean, what he's trying to get out here is kind of what I was talking about, that there's a certain form of imaginative process in this, but how about we kind of use that in a way to recontextualize it, to kind of unlearn that language? I mean, so I was presenting at a conference initially, like a couple of weeks ago, where I was talking about the use of archives in documentaries, right? So those archives that represented Muslims in a certain way are now actually being used in a way to kind of contextualize it in how they were actually used, right? How then do we make sense of the whole post 9/11 situation? So, I mean, using these art pieces, using archives and kind of unlearning that language is what you're getting at. But at the same time, I have a really interesting clip, which I don't know, I'm in love with nowadays, and I thought I would share it with you guys. But it speaks to a lot about the question of whether we belong to a certain place, whether there needs to be the question of who represents whom and by what authority, because at the same time, the question is more complex than only a specific identity politics. We're not talking about an identity that exists only talking about religiosity, but also there is class, there is nation, there is gender. There are so many other forms of intersections to an identity. This is Riz Ahmed, by the way. He won an Oscar for a short film, The Long Goodbye. That's an interesting film. But yeah, on that note, I could say we could watch the video. It's really interesting.
Did they ever ask you where you're from? Like, yeah, but where you really from? The question seems simple, but the answer's kinda long. See, I could tell them Wembley, but I don't think that's what they want. But I don't want to tell them more, because anything I say is wrong. See, Britain's where I'm born, and I love a cup of tea and that. But tea ain't from Britain, it's from where my DNA is at. And where my genes are from, that's where they stitch your jeans that I wear.
So should we wait for a bit or like reload it or something? Yeah, yeah, really interesting. Kind of goes on talking about this diasporic identity, which is again thinking through if you're in Pakistan and you're a diaspora from Britain, and we're thinking about the whole notion of decolonization, imperialism. The question he comes, I mean, at the end, he's like, do we really need to answer who we are and how do we exist? But yeah, so at that note, I wish I kind of had a better ending to the video, but yeah, with that, I would just go to my last slide and share some of the work. Okay, sure. So yeah, I just want to say at the end, I mean, I kind of work on the Muslim Voices project that I mentioned, the Center for the Study of Global Change. What we work at is having these dialogues of peace building, having dialogues of intercultural, interfaith, and that is mostly done through social media campaign, Twitter, Facebook, Insta. And yeah, if you have any ideas about that, please do share, because that's, I feel, the hashtag activism, which they call it, this new wave of understanding resistance might be something to look into. With that, thank you so much.
Oh yeah, sure. So I think we have a few minutes for a few questions if anybody would like to ask them. And because we've lost contact, I don't know if it's going to work. Okay, we're back in. Okay, so if anybody would like to ask a question online or in the room, we've got some questions over here. I have a question for you before we start. First of all, thank you. That's absolutely fantastic. It's wonderful to hear. How is social media and the internet impacting the sort of the expression of culture in Pakistan these days? I mean, how is it? Well, the whole idea of identity through social media. How's that impacting?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. But so I feel like social media is kind of having this impact, which is crossing the boundaries in certain ways. So it's kind of going beyond nationality. The communities are sort of the whole transnational feminism wave that came from social media in certain ways, thinking through that and how racial politics works in certain ways. So it's kind of crossing boundaries, kind of crossing nationalities. I mean, film or these sort of mediums, which are more formal in a way, are institutionalized to a specific nationality, a country, a community. But I feel with the social media, it's like you kind of have ways of communicating beyond borders, right?
Hi, thank you. I am curious, what are your plans once you receive your degree here? Where do you intend to go and what do you plan to do?
Well, that is an interesting question. I mean, my wife is sitting right there, so so I need to ask her. But yeah, I mean, I have worked in Pakistan as a theater artist, as a filmmaker, and the network kind of I have there, and the sort of work I really wish to do out there is something that I wish to focus on. Undoubtedly, I mean, my recent interactions more with sort of conferences I've been to internationally, I feel like there is more space for having these international collaborations, but at the same time, yes, undoubtedly my work would be focused a little more locally. I feel that's kind of at the center of what I want to work through. But the rest also, the decision, half of the decision is there. So we need to figure that out.
Thank you for your talk. And as far as Islamic film, is there a place that you would recommend to start? Something like, I guess, like with Things Fall Apart with African fiction, something that sort of like blows up I guess instead of like the racist portrayals, you get like an American film, something that is like, that rebuts that.
That it's something that I'm also exploring with my archive that I'm building, and I feel that's actually a very good question. That's something I have to also think through. BFI is kind of and sort of an archival place where they have these docs, which primarily were made for colonial documentaries. But as you kind of go through them, you kind of also think through India, subcontinent, and how notions of Muslim identity existed before partition, 1947 we were talking about. I mean, that for me at least, I mean, I'm coming more academically, that was a starting point to kind of think through these sort of daily life portrayals of anthropologists that were making documentaries on the community in Pakistan, in now Pakistan, but back then in India. And so that kind of was kind of enlightening to kind of work through these notions and how you see these time periods. You see colonization, you see to a decolonial period, we have the whole African wave of cinema, Usman Sembini, who works on fiction films, to a point where we come into this recent era of the post 9/11 sort of documentaries, which I can give you a huge list of. There are certain Pakistani filmmakers. One is actually right in the process of being exhibited. The Act of Worship by Nosheen Dadaboy is something to look forward to. She's kind of in the process of releasing. That's a great documentary coming up. It actually questions all the Islamophobic tropes and all.
Right. Thank you so much, Khurram. It's really, really great to have you with us. In honor of your presence here, there's an organization in town that we give money to. It's called New Hope for Families. And we make a contribution to them every quarter in celebration of the guests that we have. So thank you so much. Khurram and I were having a conversation before the meeting today, talking about Rotary and Rotaract and activities on campus. And we're hoping that he will join us in at least one of our projects coming up this year. So it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much. Okay, well, as I mentioned, next week we're going to be meeting here again in the Georgian room. Jim Bright will introduce our guest, Elizabeth Mitchell, who I think you know, many of you already know, and she's going to be talking about the African-American history of Bloomington. So that should be really fascinating. I will be watching online while Sally Gaskell is standing here in front of you. So that's very much looking forward to hearing what Elizabeth Mitchell has to say. Tyler, would you like to give us the four-way test? Is it not working? Okay, so we don't have the four-way test, but we all know what it looks like. So let's stand and celebrate what it, so of the things we think
Say or do. First, is it the truth?
fair,
Fair to all concerned?
third, will it build?
Goodwill and better friendship.
Better friendship.
Fourth,
Fourth, is it beneficial to all concerned?
and fifth.
Is it fun?
Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.